are you?
That opening question is the central question of the show Severance, and the way that food is used to answer that question has fascinated me since I first watched the show. There's a reason that Severance depicts very particular foods, and these foods are all teaching us something about human identity. The use of food in Severance helps to tell a deeply theological story about how we're meant to move towards maturity by integrating our passions, our desires, and our pain. Severance is about a world where people can choose an extreme form of work-life balance by separating their work life and their personal life within their brain. When you're at work, you can't remember anything from outside. And when you're at home, you can't remember anything from work. This ends up creating two different versions of a person who live entirely different lives. The version inside the office is called an innie, and the version outside the office is called an outie. We learn that the main character, Mark, underwent this procedure to help him cope after his wife's death in a car accident. After she died, he tried to continue working his other job, but he was too overwhelmed by his grief. Taking the severed job allowed him to put in a full day's work without any memory of his wife or her tragic death. In the first episode, we see Mark crying in the parking lot before work. But then, when he enters the office, his face changes completely. He's chipper, ready for another day of work, and doesn't know why he has a crumpled tissue in his pocket. It's implied that a number of the characters have chosen to undergo severance for a similar reason of avoiding some kind of pain or trauma. Now, there are a lot of things that are really weird in this show, and that's part of what makes it so entertaining. It's like a psychological dystopian version of The Office. One of the things that's so weird inside Lumen is the food. Early on, we see the team is given a melon bar to celebrate the newest severed employee, Helly. Now, a fruit platter at a corporate event isn't that weird. It's a cheap item to pick up at a grocery store and make a meeting a little more bearable. But that's not what the melon bar is. This melon bar is a bunch of melon balls inside melon halves that have been carved into bowls. It's a really unique presentation that someone put a lot of effort into, but it's still just cantaloupe and honeydew. These aren't the most exciting fruits. They're usually considered the filler parts of a fruit salad or a fruit platter. So why would they put in so much effort just to serve cantaloupe and honeydew? Later on, at Bert's retirement party, we see watermelon added to the mix with the similar extravagant presentation. I guess retirement means you've earned a little bit more melon. The next food reward that the team gets is the egg bar. Now, this is one that I'd be a little more hyped about than the melon bar. The egg bar appears to have a few different kinds of deviled eggs, some soft-boiled eggs, and some Scotch eggs. These are delicious foods. I enjoy all of them. But the egg bar is still a really weird thing to bring out at an office party. I mean, at my church, we often have deviled eggs during the coffee hour, but there are other foods too. It's not just all eggs. And lastly, we have the waffle party. Now, with the waffle party, it's not the waffles that are weird. Waffles are great. The weird part is the party? So the waffle party takes place in the replica of Keir Egan's house. Keir is the founder of Lumen, and the company has strong cult-like dynamics around him. After eating the waffles, the person is supposed to move to Keir's bed, put on a Keir mask, and then watch a weird sensual dance by 4 other masked figures. These 4 figures represent an important part of the Keir Egan philosophy that drives everything that Lumen does. So we're definitely going to talk more about that in just a minute. But aside from the vending machine snacks, these are the only foods we see the innies eat inside Lumen. The melon bar, the egg bar, and the waffle party. As I tried to figure out the connection between these foods that each feel really strange and out of place, I realized they're all breakfast foods. And that's when it hit me that these foods represent the emotional and mental state of the innies. Remember that the innies only exist because someone has chosen to become severed from their work self, and the innies have no memory of life outside Lumen. So the innies' lifespan is only as long as they've been working at Lumen. In other words, the innies are basically children, and we see them treated like children throughout the show. The innies are referred to by their first name and last initial, Mark S, Helly R, Dylan G, which is a common way teachers will refer to elementary school children. But then their outies are referred to more formally, like you might expect in a business setting, Mr. Scout rather than Mark S. But then on top of that, the innies don't even know the first names of their superiors and refer to them as Miss Cobell, Mr. Milchick, Mr. Grainer. The infantilization of the innies extends to their activities as well. To get to know a new employee, they play a childish game of rolling a red ball to each other. And in addition to the strange foods, they're rewarded for their work with childish perks like finger traps or a 5-minute music dance experience.
The maraca. Excellent choice.
Should have gone for the castanets.
The innies are treated like children, and this is why all the foods at Lumen are breakfast foods. Breakfast happens at the beginning of the day, but the innies never get to move beyond that. They're stuck in a perpetual childhood without the movement towards maturity that is meant to characterize every human life. What we're seeing at Lumen are incomplete, fragmented people. It's clear when we watch the show how problematic it is to separate oneself like this. But what makes the show interesting is that all the severed workers chose to enter this arrangement. As I said before, it's implied that a number of the severed workers have chosen this path as an escape from some kind of trauma in their outie's life. Mark was so distraught after the death of his wife Gemma that he couldn't handle going to work. This severed job allows him to get through a day of work and get a paycheck without being overwhelmed by grief. Irving lives alone with his dog, and his father was in the Navy. Because Irving's dog is named Radar, I think it's possible Irving was in the military as well, and maybe using the severed job to deal with some kind of trauma from that. We learn that Dylan has kids on the outside, but when Milchick comes over to talk to him outside of work, one of the kids is supposed to stay outside of the closet watching TV and counting, while Milchick and Dylan have a private conversation in the closet. I'm guessing that this is because Dylan lost his wife, either through death or divorce, and is having to get by as a single dad. Like Mark, that loss of his wife is probably what prompted him to take the severed job. At Petey's funeral, we find out that this was his situation. He was struggling after his divorce and took the severed job to avoid that pain. As an aside, I think this is why Helly's innie is more rebellious than the others. They're all broken people who have avoided dealing with their trauma, so their innies are naturally more compliant. But Helly isn't there to avoid trauma. We find out in the finale that she has an entirely different purpose for being severed, and I think that's why her innie is more strong-willed. The fact that a number of the severed employees seem to choose severance in order to avoid pain or trauma makes me wonder if Lumen even advertises severance in this way, so that they can find broken, compliant workers. It's definitely a part of the propaganda they're giving the innies. At one point, Milchick says, things like deaths happen outside of here, not here. A life at Lumen is protected from such things. And I think a great potential response to all of that from you is gratitude. Okay, quick interjection here, because as I'm editing this video, Apple TV has a promo for season 2 that's this fake corporate ad for Lumen. It's super creepy. And it literally says, do you have a life you want to forget? Come work at Lumen. So I think this theory is pretty spot on. Lumen convinces people to avoid pain and trauma, and the result is stunted human beings. But this isn't the only way Lumen is trying to cut off the innie's full experience of humanity. The Lumen philosophy is also really weird when it comes to passion, desire, and the emotions. One of the central components of Keir Egan's philosophy is the taming of the tempers. The idea is that there are 4 main emotions that each person must learn to control: woe, frolic, dread, and malice. I don't know where these 4 came from, but if anyone knows of a source for these 4 being the main human emotions, please let me know in the comments. Essentially, Keir's idea is that becoming a mature human being means growing in self-control by clamping down on these emotions. Now, self-control isn't a bad thing. Paul lists it as a fruit of the Spirit. But Lumen's idea of self-control is to make people passionless and robotic. In episode 2, Mark shares with the group that seeing the old group photo with his friend Petey, who no longer worked at Lumen, made him feel sad, so he hid the photos in the supply closet. Milchick refers to this action as an outburst, when this is just a normal human emotion to feel sad when your friend is gone. This is why the foods at Lumen are all a little boring. There's nothing you'd call comfort food. Lumen gives the innies these specific foods because they're trying to prevent indulgence. I think Lumen is also trying to avoid the deep connection between food and memory. Think about the movie Ratatouille, which depicts this so well. As soon as Anton Ego tastes the ratatouille, he's immediately transported back to his childhood, when he came in from the rain and his mom gave him a warm dish of ratatouille. The foods we love hook into our brains at a deeply emotional level. We see this connection between food and memory in the Bible as well. In Deuteronomy chapter 12, God commands Israel to remember their story and remember the God who saved them through a shared meal. Every time they would eat their offering together, they would remember that the one true God had saved them and brought them into this land. Lumen gives the innies bland and boring foods because they don't want to arouse their memories and their passions. The taming of the tempers is all about making people passionless. That's why Irving smashes a deviled egg into the Lumen handbook later in the season. He's discovering love and passion, and he's ready to move beyond the immature, stunted life he's lived at Lumen. He's ready to move beyond breakfast. So as he gets on the elevator, the night they're going to activate their innies in the outside world, Irving tells the team,
Let's find out what's for dinner.
The taming of the tempers is not only depicted in a painting, but it also gets acted out at the waffle party. I told you we'd be coming back to the weird dancing. The waffle party is such a strange interjection to life at Lumen. In contrast to the stark, passionless experience of working at Lumen, one innie per quarter is allowed to have this presumably sexual experience with 4 individuals wearing masks. Now, waffles are, in my opinion, the best food that they get at Lumen, but it's still a breakfast food, cluing us in that this isn't a real feast, but a parody of a feast. What we see in the waffle party is childish overindulgence. What Lumen expects to happen at the waffle party is like the scene near the end of the movie Chocolat, when the mayor of the town, who has been getting everyone to repress their desires and resist indulgence, goes into the chocolate store and eats everything up in this childish display of just completely pigging out. I actually think the waffle party wasn't originally part of the experience for severed workers, but Lumen eventually realized they needed some kind of release valve for the way that they forced these workers to suppress passion and desire. And we see their passion leak out in various ways. During Irving's wellness session, he smiles when Miss Casey tells him, "Your Audi is skilled at kissing and lovemaking." Lumen tells people, cut off your pain, cut off your passion, and you can be safe. But this is a false promise. Remember, the whole show is trying to answer its opening question: who are you? And we see pretty clearly that when you cut off a portion of yourself, you're cutting off the opportunity to grow into maturity. Avoiding pain is also avoiding growth. Growth happens when we confront pain and move through it. Suffering and maturity are deeply connected in Scripture. In Romans 5, Paul says suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. That's because maturity isn't just about growing up, it's about the integration of pain, trauma, passion, and desire into a whole self. Lumen's system short-circuits this process. By severing the innie from suffering, it also severs them from growth, maturity, and the capacity for hope. Lumen says, cut off what makes life difficult. But Jesus says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Jesus invites us to bring our whole selves to him and receive true rest for our souls. Lumen promises a false peace by avoiding parts of yourself. Jesus invites you to confront your whole self, your pain, your trauma, your passion and desires, your sin and the darkness within you. Only by confronting what's real can you find healing and integration in God.